Father, as we come to study your word, we humbly ask, Holy Spirit, that you will anoint our minds to hear it and receive it, that you will bless our hearts to understand it, and convict our spirits to commit ourselves wholly and unreservedly to obeying it. Father, teach us from your word. We ask that the words of my mouth and the meditation of each and every heart here is today will please you, our Lord, our rock, and our eternal Redeemer. Amen. To understand our passage today, we actually have to go back in time, back quite a bit in time. In fact, we have to go back, way back, all the way to the beginning of the Bible. To understand what's happening in Esther chapter 5, we actually have to turn first to Genesis chapter 3. In Genesis chapter 3, we have a picture of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, a perfect existence, a paradise created for humanity by God, just for us. And in Genesis chapter 3, there's a new character in the story introduced, and that character comes in the form of a snake, a serpent. That character is none other than Satan himself. And he comes to Eve, and he deceives her. And he tricks her into eating the forbidden fruit, the fruit that God said, don't eat of this fruit. He said, eat anything else you want, but not this. And the serpent tricks her into eating that fruit, and Adam follows suit. And our passage that we need to look at picks up where God enters into the picture and says, what have you done? And then he curses each of the three for the parts that they have played in the entry of sin into creation. Genesis 3 verse 14 is where God curses the serpent. And so listen now to this passage. It says, the Lord God spoke to the serpent. He said, because you have done this, I am putting a curse on you. You are cursed more than any of the livestock, and all of the wild animals. You will crawl on the ground. You will eat dust all the days of your life. I will put hatred between you and the woman. Your children and her children will be enemies. Her son will crush your head as you strike his heel. Her son will crush the head of the serpent. Her son is none other than Jesus Christ. He will come one day to destroy the power and the life of Satan. This is a prediction by God about his redemptive plan, exactly how he's going to fix it. When he comes and sees this problem, when he acknowledges this problem to people and explains it to them, he says, I have a solution for this problem. And this solution will be this descendant of Eve, this son of Eve will come and destroy this serpent and all that he has done. But for this to happen, Eve must have a child. Eve must have a child for this prophecy and this promise to come true. Her child will in turn have a child. Her grandchild will have a child. And her children's children will have children. They in turn will have more children and more children. And ultimately, one of these children will be Jacob, who is also known as Israel, the father of the Israelites. Jesus is an Israelite. He's a Jew. Before Jesus is born, before Mary and Joseph, his parents, are born, before their great-great-great-great-grandparents are born, our story picks up with a man named Haman. Haman wants to kill these descendants of Eve. He wants to kill off all the descendants of Israel. He wants to destroy the Jews, who will be Jesus' earthly ancestors. God, in order to keep his promise, which he gives in Genesis chapter 3, has got to stop Haman. Haman has become an ally to Satan, and he wants to destroy God's plan of redemption because Satan has moved in his heart and corrupted his soul. And he has become a pawn in Satan's plan to stop God's plan of redemption. So God has got to put an end to Haman. He's got to stop Haman. But But notice in our passage that God does not act to do this until his people get down on their knees and pray. That's where we picked up. That's where we left off in Esther. Before we last 2 weeks ago, we left off in Esther chapter 4, and the last thing that Esther says to Mordecai is, gather all of our people together and fast, and I and my women will fast. Oh, we will fast as well. And that's chapter 4, verse 24. Wrong book. Esther, Ezra 16. Go and gather the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Neither eat day nor night nor drink day or night. And I and my maids will also fast as you do. And after that I will go to the king, even though it is against the law, and if I perish, I will perish. Mordecai went away and did everything that Esther had ordered him. God waits until he sees his people humbling themselves, bowing their knees in prayer before he acts to fulfill his promise. He's going to fulfill it, but he's waiting to see our response to that. And that brings us into our passage for today, Esther chapter 5. Esther chapter 5, in the first verse, it says that 3 days go by. It says, on the third day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace opposite the king's hall. The king was sitting on his royal throne inside the palace, opposite the entrance to the palace. Esther comes after 3 days of fasting to the king, and she comes to bring about his redemption of the Jews. Notice the contrast. We've said in Esther that when something important is happening, there is a feast. In the end of chapter 4, we find a fast. This fast is the opposite, the counterpoint to the Persians. The Jews fast while the Persians feast, and it's drawing our attention to the importance of this issue. But Esther's timing indicates her desire to ride on the wings of the prayers of the Jews. It's the third day. The fast is coming to a close. Esther says, I've got to act now while the people are praying. I want the power of prayer to support me through this endeavor. I need the power of God to support me, to make my endeavors successful. And so on the third day, it says, that's how chapter 5 opens up. On the third day, Esther goes to the king. She dresses up though. She's counting on prayer, but she's also using her wisdom, her God-given wisdom, and all the gifts that God has given her. She is dressing up to please the king. She's not going to him just in normal fashion. She's not going to him and saying, hey honey, I have a problem. She is taking her time and preparing herself. She is preparing herself physically so that when the king sees her, he will see that respect that she is giving him, that she's taking the time to dress herself up. And also, we're going to find out to do some other things in preparation for her discussion with the king. In fact, if we go back even further in the story, Esther is being sharply contrasted to Vashti. Vashti, who disrespected the king and ignored his command to come. Esther, who comes to the king humbly, prepared, and doing everything she can to please him. So there's a contrast here between Esther and Vashti. She also remembers, and as we read the story, are reminded about Vashti's end. Because of her disrespect for the king, she was exiled, banished from his presence. And now, as Esther comes, she knows that she's facing a death penalty if the king doesn't respond in a positive way. She's relying on prayer, but she's also using her head in this part of the story. And we're going to see how the king responds in the next couple of verses. One other thing. As she's standing here, the text says she stood in the presence of the king. Don't miss that. When somebody saw the king, the proper response was what? Bow. Get down. Pay homage. And it says that she stood in the presence of the king. And so he looks across the room, and he looks at all the people bowed down. And he sees one figure on the far side of the room standing. Esther really has taken her own life, taken her life in her hands, and given her life to the king. She's risked her life for the sake of her people, but she needs to get his attention. And so she does this willingly because she knows it will get his attention. Now she has but one hope, the king's mercy. Verse 2. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, pause here, wait, suspense is built, the story is tense. Readers of the story for the first time wonder what is going to happen here. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, we think back to Vashti, how he lost his temper. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. That's the feeling you get when you first read this story. And he held out his golden scepter, which was in his hand. This is a sign that the king gives when he pardons someone. He holds out his scepter. She is pardoned. And the person responds, as Esther does. Esther approached and reached out and touched the top of the scepter. Step 1, she's alive. She's not dead. Praise God for answered prayer.
No.
Verse 3, the king said to her, will the prayer continue? Will the power of prayer follow through? Will she complete her mission? Or will her mission fall and fail? What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? It shall be given you, even to half my kingdom. Success. Prayer has been answered. God has worked through the prayers of his people, right? As you're reading the story, you say, yes, Esther, go for it. Tell them what the problem is. Explain what the issue is. Get that wicked Haman out of there. Save your people, Esther. Now is the time to strike. The king has just promised you half his kingdom. Now we know that that's a phrase or a line that the king's used saying, I'm going to be very generous. He will never give her half a kingdom. But he's saying, I will give you what you want. Ask, and it will be yours. Esther asking. You can hear the people cheering her on. Come on, Esther, now's the time. Strike while the iron's hot. But what does she do? Esther said, if it pleases the king, let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I have prepared for the king. What? Esther, no! No, what are you doing? The king has promised you to give you whatever you want. Just ask him. Save the people. But that's not what she does. In fact, I believe that, you can talk to, you read all the different commentators, and there's lots of different theories as to why she delays at this point. Some as far out as saying she wants to get him drunk before she asks him. There's all sorts of theories, but I think that all of the best theories tie into one idea, and that is that Esther is moved by God's Spirit because of the prayers of the people. She's just spent 3 days fasting and praying, seeking God's wisdom. The people have gathered together and fasted and prayed for her to have wisdom and the king to respond well. And I believe that all of the best explanations to why she waits here, we're going to talk a little bit about a couple of them in a minute, all of them tie into the fact that God is moving in the background. The text does not mention God at all. Esther, the entire book, does not mention God at all. But interestingly, in this passage, in the Hebrew, the first of the first 4 words in this passage are Y-H-W-H, the Tetragrammaton, the word for Yahweh. It spells out God's name. The author of this text is implying, and he's hinting, and he's revealing that God is here, even though we can't see him. When you read some of the oldest manuscripts here, and you get to this point, the first 4 letters of the first 4 words of this passage, where Esther says, the king and Haman come to a banquet with me, the first 4 words spell out the name of God. And in the ancient manuscripts, a lot of them have those letters enlarged. So it's like G, O, D. It's declaring the presence of God and reminding the people that even though God's name isn't mentioned in the text, He is here all the time, answering the prayers. And I believe that all of Beth's explanations are tied up to that truth, that God is behind the scenes here, working in Esther and through Esther. Esther said, if it pleases the king, G-O-D, let the king and Haman come today to a banquet that I have prepared for the king. Esther is observing here a politeness in their society. It would be impolite for her to just come to the king and say, now give me something. Even though he has promised it, it would be rude. And even though he's promised it, she wants to exhibit all the graces and all the courtesy and all the respect that the king feels that he deserves. And so she says, my request is simple. I would like to honor you, king, with a banquet. You alone and your right-hand man, your vice president, your number 2, I would like to honor you and spend time with you. I would like to be with you and your right-hand man. So the king says, quickly, bring Haman, so that we may do as Esther desires. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. I told you that Esther prepared herself. She dressed up in her royal robes, but she had the banquet prepared. She came to him assuming that God would answer her, that her mission would be a success, that the king would accept her invitation. As she prayed over the 3 days and God revealed to her how she should go about winning the king's favor. And he said, have a banquet for the king so that he will be in his best graces. She believed that God would deliver her. And so when the king says, oh, you want to have dinner with me? You want to make dinner for me? That's nice. Well, when would you like to do it? If it pleases the king, I've already prepared the banquet. And it's ready now, if you will come. Oh, well, quickly, get Haman. What are we waiting for? I'm famished. And so they go off. Esther has made preparation, assuming that God would be faithful and answer the prayers that she and the people, the Jews, had offered up. While they were drinking wine, the king said to Esther, what is your petition? It shall be granted to you. What is your request? Even half of my kingdom. It shall be fulfilled. Here we go. Now is the time for Esther to act, right? Now she has pleased the king. She has showed deference and respect. She has bestowed upon him all the respect that he feels he deserves. She has fed him. He is filled. His hunger is sated. He is sitting back after dinner, relaxed, with his best buddy in all the kingdom. She has provided for their needs. And he says, now that you've done this thing, now that you've done the right, you have shown me the courtesy that I deserve as king, now tell me what is it that you want. Esther, now is the time to strike. Now is the time to tell the king about this wicked Haman. Now is the time to reveal his plan and to save your people. This is the time to strike. Let's see as Esther responds. Esther said, this is my petition and my request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to fulfill my request, everybody's holding their breath, little children are biting their nails, to grant my request, will the king respond in anger? Will Haman defend himself? When she accuses him, what's going to happen? If it pleases the king to fulfill my petition, grant my petition, fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and then I will do as the king said. What? Esther! What are you doing? Twice now the king has promised to give you exactly what it is you want, and twice you missed the opportunity to seize it, to take the king at his offer. So what's going on here? Why is Esther delaying? I said that I think that all the best answers and the best explanations tie into the fact that God is working behind the scenes, that God is preparing and working, controlling, manipulating this entire situation to make sure that things happen exactly as He wants them to happen. But from an earthly perspective, this seems foolish. Esther is doing a really dumb thing. Think about all the things that could happen between now and tomorrow when they have the feast that she is preparing for the next day. Let's see. Haman could discover that she's a Jew. Haman could get suspicious and say, I wonder why this queen is doing all this stuff. Somebody go find out about this woman and see, tell me about her. Tell me about her background. Tell me who she likes, who she hangs out, where she came from. Tell me about her. She's a Jew. She is one of Mordecai's people. And he could thwart her plan. 24 hours is a long time to wait. What about the king? The king's in a good mood today. Who knows what mood he'll wake up tomorrow? He could wake up on the wrong side of the bed. He could wake up and all the political stuff could happen, and he could be very frustrated and angry. War could break out on one of his sides of his empire. Somebody could come and give him a bad report. The crops could be failing. Famine could be happening. Rebellion could be going on. Any number of things could happen to change the demeanor of the king over the next 24 hours so that he would be less predisposed to give her what she wants. He could change his mind. He could say, tomorrow, something could come up that calls him away on business. He's the king. He may have to leave. He may not even be there. Tomorrow, he may not be as gracious as he is today. What in the world is Esther thinking? As we continue to read through the story, I think it will become very clear that the prayer that Esther and the Jews participated in, the time of fasting and the seeking of God's favor and instruction and guidance that they embark upon, bear fruit. That God is moving in their spirit to say, wait, not yet. Now is not the time. The next passage, chapter 6, that we won't get to today, we're going to see why now is not the time. Esther doesn't know why now is not the time, other than to say that God has moved in her spirit to say, wait. But there's another thing that's happening here. Listen to how Esther says this. This is my petition and my request. If I have won favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet that I will prepare for them, and I will ask the king my request at that time. Basically, she's getting an agreement by the king. She's saying, look, if you're not really going to give me my request, don't bother. Don't bother to come tomorrow. You can let me down easy. You can save face. Just don't come tomorrow. She's saying, but if you're going to really, if you mean it, if you're really going to give me what I'm asking, what I'm going to ask for, then come back tomorrow for another dinner. She's getting the king's guarantee. If the king comes to dinner tomorrow, he has just made a promise to her that if I come tomorrow, I will grant your request. He's already made it twice, but he's saying a third time with his body. He said it twice with his mouth, but with his body he's going to come again and say, I will grant your request by his mere presence. She's saying, if you really want to give me my request, come tomorrow to a dinner. Listen one more time. If I have won the king's favor, this is my petition and my request. If I have won the king's favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and to fulfill my request, so if you're going to do it, then let the king and Haman come tomorrow to the banquet I will prepare for you. Then I will tell you what it is that I want. So this is very significant, too. She has just made the king promise in front of Haman and in front of all the people, the guards that are watching them. The king is never fully alone, but she's made him promise that he is going to do this. So, our passage ends on a different note. The feast is over. Remember, in Esther, every time there's a feast, something important is happening. So the feast is now over, the central feast of this passage. It says that Haman went out that day happy and in good spirits. Why not? He is the top of the empire. He alone with the king have been invited to the queen's dinner. He's number 2 in the entire Persian Empire. He cannot get any higher than he can right now. Even if the king dies, he's not going to replace the king, because the king is a hereditary thing. It's passed down from father to son. He has attained that which everybody else in the Persian Empire wants. And he is now in favor with the king and the queen. He is the king's best friend. And the queen likes him too. The queen just took him out to dinner with the king. So Haman went out that day, happy and in good spirits. But things change here. But when Haman saw Mordecai at the king's gate, and observed that he neither rose nor trembled before him, he was infuriated. Mordecai should be terrified of Haman. Haman has the power to destroy Mordecai's nation. All of the people, and he's doing it. He has received from the king permission to kill all the Jews. And Mordecai doesn't even tremble when he sees him. This Mordecai has got to learn. Haman has put it off long enough. He's going to act. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Then he sent and called for his friends and his wife Zeresh. And Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him, and how he advanced above all the officials and all the ministers of the king. Haman added, even Queen Esther, let no one but him myself come to the king's banquet, and the king to the banquet that she prepared. Tomorrow I am also invited by her together with the king. Haman is bragging. He is proud. He is arrogant, and he loves it. He loves the accolades. He loves the spotlight. He loves the awards. He loves the recognition, the respect that he's getting. This guy is arrogance embodied. The entire kingdom respects him. One guy doesn't. Mordecai. He says, yet all this does me no good. So long as I see the Jew, Mordecai, sitting at the king's gate. So long as Mordecai sits there, Haman can't be happy. Then his wife speaks up. And all throughout Esther, the wives play an important role. Vashti, Esther, and now Zeresh, Haman's wife. It says, then his wife Zeresh and all his friends said to him, let a gallows 50 cubits high be made. 50 cubits is about 75 feet. Let a gallows 75 feet be built. And in the morning, go to the king and have Mordecai hanged on it. Then, in the afternoon, go with the king to the banquet and enjoy yourself. Be at peace to know that Mordecai will no longer frustrate you, disrespect you. And this advice pleased Haman. And that very night, he had a gallows built. Now, when we hear gallows, we probably have a picture of cowboys on their horses with their 6-shooters on their hips. We see a guy standing up there with a noose around his neck. But really, what they're talking about here is much more like a pike, like a post. And they're going to impale Mordecai on this post. They're going to ram him through and hang him up so that everybody can see. This is what happens to the man who disrespects Haman. It could be a post that they're going to ram right through him, or one other thing that this may be is a cross. Persians invented crucifixion. Romans perfected it. Haman wants to crucify Mordecai. Haman wants to crucify Mordecai. And in this story, we are seeing all sorts of foreshadows of God's work throughout human history. How God is involved with every aspect of history. How He is guiding and directing and working within humanity, working within our culture, working within our history through the kings and through the people to direct history to its ultimate fulfillment when Jesus, God Himself, God the Son, comes to redeem the sinners of the world. Esther becomes a foreshadow. The story of Esther becomes a foreshadow of what Christ is doing. It's a microcosm of the larger story that began in Genesis. Imagine that cross, 75 foot high, with a person hanging on it, on top of a hill. Where else have we seen that cross in our history? Christ. Esther becomes a foreshadow of God's ultimate plan of redemption, which began in Genesis chapter 3. See, God is going to complete His plan of redemption. He's going to save the Jews, which we're going to continue our study next week, next time. This is where chapter 5 ends, and it leaves us on a bit of a cliffhanger. As the sun sets, we see this cross, this empty cross, standing on a hill, and we wonder what's going to happen. It seems as though Esther has missed her opportunity, because remember, Haman is going to go to the king in the morning and have Mordecai executed before dinner. So even if Esther saves her people, she will lose her father. It seems like Esther has missed her opportunity. She has taken a major gamble, and at this point, it seems like that gamble will not pay off. She's hoping that the king will be favorable tomorrow, but she has no knowledge and no certainty of that, other than prayer and the assurance of knowing God's goodness to her people. She has no assurance of that, other than knowing that the Israelites are the people of God, the people that God has chosen to work through, to bring about His ultimate redemption of all of humanity. She has no promise and no hope other than the promise of prayer and God's promise in Genesis 3 that the Israelites would be delivered. But remember, we, as we read through the story, see God's handiwork behind the scenes. God has a plan of redemption, which He revealed in Genesis chapter 3. And as we read through the Old Testament, we see again and again God's intimate involvement with individuals and with nations throughout humanity. He's not some God way out there uninvolved. He's right here with us in our lives and working through history. God always is working out His plan. No matter what obstacles come, no matter what obstacles Satan throws out there, no matter how much foolishness Satan throws into our world and how much Satan tries to throw off God's plan of redemption, God continues to work, and He works when His people pray. We need to be praying people. We need to be a people united in prayer. We need to be a people expectantly watching for God to do amazing things, to bring about His plan of redemption, which began with Jesus and will end with Jesus' second return. We need to be a people praying and expecting as God's doing amazing things in history and in our lives each day. And we need to watch it and we need to recognize it. Too many times God does it, we go on our merry way, missing everything that God has done for us. Let's pray. Father, as the song, the hymn reminds us, open our eyes that we may see glimpses of your amazing, incredible love as your plan unfolds before us. Help us to recognize your action in our lives each day. Help us to recognize your goodness wherever we go and wherever we are. Help us to recognize the hope that you give in Jesus Christ for redemption, for all people who will believe in him. Help us, because we know that it is Satan who will cause us to disbelieve, discredit, discount, and discourage all others from accepting this truth. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for your sacrifice on that cross that redeems those who believe in you. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.